Welcome to our listeners today on the Leora Workplace Wellbeing app, where we explore topics that can impact our mental health and overall well-being. I'm thrilled to have this conversation today and introduce our guest, Dr. David Grinning. Dr. Grinning is an obstetrician and gynaecologist, and he's also the author for the book, The Roadmap to Fertility. Having practiced being an obstetrician and gynaecologist since 2002, you have extensive training in some of Australia's and the world's leading medical institutes. You've had the immense privilege of safely delivering over 2,500 babies. I'd love for us to start with a really big picture view and just the overall trends that you're seeing in the fertility space. These are constantly evolving, as are the human needs. So what are some of the most notable changes or developments you've observed in this field of fertility since you began your career?
Well, thank you for the introduction. There's been quite a big change, but the number one change is that we are definitely in the world of fertility having children later. And for example, in Australia, we are now the leading oldest first-time mothers in the whole world. So I think it's now 32, so a big shift. And the second shift is we're having a lot less children than we used to. I think Australia's down to about 1.58 children per couple, so two people are not replacing themselves. And in the world, there's a huge shift everywhere to less children. I think South Korea is down to 0.58 children. It's massive change.
Mm-hmm. And so these are changes because of choices and less to do with health less to do with, I guess, personal health conditions or implications. Or is it, because the aging population and the choice to not have kids, that's a personal decision that people are making. And then I guess with women and the average age of 32 now, what did that come from? Was that in early 20s a decade ago, or?
If you think about it, your grandmother probably had children in the late teens or even early 20s, and then shifted to sort of mid 20s, and then it's gone up. But the change is universal across the world. It's even seen in Africa, and they're having children, less children, having them later. It's probably an economic decision and a personal choice, but very much to do with female working in the workforce.
Yeah,
to be the driving factor.
We can see the trend is increasing, and so this is going to open up conversations clearly in the workplace. And with more and more women actually choosing to, like you said, delay having kids, it's because they might be prioritizing their professional aspirations, etc. So this topic, there is still stigma around it, and there's also an element of self-worth and confidence that comes up. Right? How do you suggest we normalize this conversation, and why do you think it's important for us to normalize it now?
Two reasons. One is that fertility is a common problem. If you think about it, 1 in 6 couples are having fertility issues. That's the number that we know. And it's probably getting worse because we're getting older, having our children, and any medical problems that we have tend to be worse. So, for example, if you've got polycystic ovaries, by the time you're in your mid to late 30s, they're a lot worse than when you were younger. Polycystic ovaries. If you've got endometriosis, the same problem. You're exposing yourself to lots of other things. Secondly, 1 in 6 is a big number. 1 in 6 people go to a mall, sit down in a food court. 1 in 6 couples are having trouble, but not many talk about it because that is definitely an issue. That's one of the problems. They just don't want to tell people that they're the one couple out of the 6 that are having trouble. It should be simple to get pregnant, and it's not. It's a lot more difficult than people realize, and getting harder because of that aging issue as we get older. So I guess your question is, though, how do we make it more open and talk about it? That one is definitely a problem. I'm not seeing a massive shift in that becoming an open topic of conversation. People feel that they've let themselves down, that their definition as a woman, they should be able to conceive, that as a male, they should be able to get their partner pregnant, and they're not. And if they're not, it's terribly stressful on their ego. So I'm not sure we're seeing that become a much more open conversation.
Yeah. And so one of the things that we try and promote as part of Leora's purpose is things that we can control. So our lifestyle decisions, nutrition, diet, health, things like that. Can we touch on that first, and then we'll look at some of the other factors? But have you seen, and is there an impact in our lifestyle decisions, whether it comes to nutrition and exercise, that impacts fertility, or is that not part of the equation of someone not being able to fall pregnant?
It's a good question. I don't think it's so much lifestyle, like people aren't doing, the drugs that can affect, recreational drugs can affect it. Smoking's dropping off massively, which I, by the way, is a fantastic thing. It's one of the worst things. There is a little bit of lifestyle we're seeing, binge drinking in males. It's not good for sperm, but that's the more common behavior, especially the younger males. They, very big binges on weekends and don't realize it can mess up sperm. But I think the main issue is age, because, for example, if I see a couple and they walk in my door, I'm only looking for one fact when I first look at them, and that is how old is the female, because that is the single biggest driver of fertility. For whatever reason, from an evolutionary perspective, males make sperm and it's brand new every 3 months, and females are born with a set number of eggs and they are aging. So a 20-year-old female at 20 has young 20-year-old eggs, and the same female at 40 has old eggs, and our fertility options are dropping massively with that issue.
Mm-hmm. And so with that, you bring up a really interesting point around the quality of eggs as we change, as we age, sorry. And I was just going to say that as people, our values change and evolve as well as we're aging. So in our 20s, we may not think that work is an incredible priority for us, but then we might go into our sort of early 30s and say, actually, I'm loving what I'm doing, and I want to spend the next decade dedicating the majority of my time in my profession. Yep. So then we go to that lifestyle and choice, where we're seeing the trend of women that are freezing their eggs. So what kind of advice do you have for women that are young women that aren't sure whether they should be freezing their eggs or they should wait another, say, 5 or 7 years before they freeze their eggs?
Sure. It's not a difficult conversation. It's probably more about the word before egg freezing. The word is just where do they, or just the word fertility, because most people don't really think about it. They just assume that they're fertile. They're whatever age, they're having sex, and they think, they're preventing getting pregnant. And so it just comes as a rude shock to them when they think that they can't get pregnant. But just to think about their fertility somewhere along the way. And, if we could get something into schools to say that, for example, fertility is affected by lifestyle, but mostly by age. So if we could give some really basic fundamentals to high school kids, they would suddenly realize that fertility is also part of the teaching at schools, so that they would know that from sort of mid-30s on, their fertility is under significant stress, just so they know, and at least thought about it, and then they could talk it over with their partners. Where does it fit into their life, their careers, and putting it off until their late 30s or early 40s is actually going to make things very difficult for them.
Yeah, because Dr. Green, like for me, I'm not coming into this conversation as an expert by any means, but very much as an observer of, what I'm seeing in the workplace.
Yep.
And I do think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of people, fertility is taken for granted. Yes. So when it's time, they're really excited about then having children. And like you said, it's a rude shock or an experience that they undergo. It's a very very challenging period for them. So you're absolutely right. Like, how do we get this sort of education in as early on as possible, and knowing that there are implications in the future as our quality of eggs decline?
It's not hard for someone like me to assess someone's fertility potential. It's not complicated at all. There are egg timer tests floating around. I don't think you necessarily have to do them, but I just think they should think about it perhaps by their early 30s and have the conversation with their partner. Where do we want to go in terms of fertility, even if it's just having the one child or even no children? But if it's one child or even, two at the most, then still worth the conversation, because if they leave it to their mid to late 30s, they suddenly can discover there's issues that doctors have to work out, and then we're chasing our tails trying to work out how to get them pregnant.
Mm-hmm. And what does the process involve? Is this an extensive process? How does someone prepare themselves? We've spoken about mentally how to prepare yourself for something like this. You're obviously having the conversations, you're preparing.
So if they come in and we can do a basic workup on terms of their what we call the egg quality, we can do a thing called the AMH, which is known as the egg timer test. Well, it's an anti-Mullerian hormone. So every little tiny egg puts out a little bit of this AMH. So the better the number, the more eggs they've got stored in their ovaries. We can get an ultrasound to have a look at their ovaries and their uterus, make sure it all looks normal, get a sperm count. If they're all good and the patient's fairly, early 30s, then we can reassure them that their fertility is going to remain fairly constant for a few more years, and put it on a sort of algorithm, give them an idea how to think about it and what they should do. If they're if we see them for urgent reasons, obviously they've got cancer, we want to freeze eggs, so we're going to do that starting today. Yeah, that's different. But I can we can give those sort of patients a really good idea where their fertility is at the moment. That gives them choices about what to do. I don't think everyone needs egg freezing, for example, but it's definitely becoming a more common conversation that I'm having with patients.
Yeah. And whether this is a decision that a woman makes voluntarily, or it's because they may have cancer or some terminal illness, and so they've got a time period to do this, mentally and emotionally, it has an impact.
Yep.
How do you, I've been having a look at this book that you wrote, and we'll come back to this, but how do you encourage men to come on this journey? Because whilst it's from what I've heard, speaking to some of my female friends, it's quite an intrusive process for their body. What advice do you have for men so it becomes a couple's journey?
Well, the first one would be read my book, because I wrote it to try and get men to get involved. I've often thought the journey of fertility is like driving on a long road trip, and the men are sitting in the back seat and the woman's carrying the burden of most of the driving. They're doing the research, they're doing the reading, and men, being men, think that if their equipment functions and it seems to be doing the right thing, there's nothing wrong with them. But in fact, strangely, they're actually the number one cause of fertility. If women have more to go wrong, but men are the number one most likely cause of a low sperm count or something like that. Getting men involved, yeah, it's tricky. If they come along and they get, they see that, ultimately they want to be a father as much as she wants to be a mother, but for whatever reason, biology says she has to carry the pregnancy, so that she's got more work to do. But the men are ultimately the ones that get involved and start educating themselves are really helpful. I love those couples. When the couples come in and the guy's looking out the window and she's doing all the work, it's more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a little bit of education. So, read a book or just read something.
Yeah, and be part of that conversation with them.
Definitely. Perfect. Exactly. Because couples that work together, they lean on each other.
Yes. And have you also found there are sort of better outcomes generally if they're also seeking some form of therapy through the process?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Generally, it's an education process. We're trying to find out where they are in terms of fertility. So my patients, 98% of them walk in, they've got infertility, and half of them have never been pregnant, and the other half have had a previous pregnancy and can't seem to get another one. So they're quite challenged as well. So, they're not really coming in for education purposes. That seems to be missing out there in society, having a grasp of fertility. Once they walk in, then we just get some basic tests done and work out what's exactly going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so let's expand on the book that you've written. Why should someone read it? Why is it a good manual for them?
look, education's always a good thing, but I did try and keep it pretty simple, and I did actually try to write it, see if men would actually read it for once, just to make it lots of facts and figures and stuff. And like all things, a little bit of education's a good thing if you read up on it. I like fly fishing, so I like reading books on fly fishing and watching some YouTube clips and seeing how to do it. So education helps me learn how to be better at that. It's the same for fertility. I mean, there are lots of good books. Mine's just a little bit different, and then I tried to write it to get the male and the female to read it.
Yeah, and with 1 in 6 couples that might be having fertility challenges, we're going to expect this in our workplace. How do managers and peers prepare themselves if someone is to open up this conversation? And there is a financial burden as well as a mental and emotional implications, right? So how do you encourage like leaders to be comfortable with talking about this?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question, actually. I often tell my patients that if they're going through fertility, particularly fertility treatments, so it might be major surgery or IVF, that they probably should open up to their boss, just someone they feel like they can trust, just to say what they're going through, because most bosses are actually quite supportive of their staff doing that. They're often nervous to tell them, because if they're telling their boss that they're going through fertility treatment, that means they're aiming to get pregnant, in which case they're probably going to drop out of their workforce at some point. But of course, that's the standard behaviorism for most. 5 out of 6 couples, the females are getting pregnant and dropping out of the workforce at that point. But I think, if they do open up and just say they're going through it, that also means if there's any issues with it, that boss is supportive. So I think for the patient's perspective, talking to their bosses, and then from the boss's perspective, talking to that, just to be supportive for of their workers that are going through it, because it's a common problem. I don't know if it's something that gets mentioned in the corporate world or the boss world, that their staff may in fact be going through it. How they keep the lines of communication open without crossing what is a fairly intimate conversation.
Over my sort of course of leadership, there have been instances, and I have to say that the very first time that someone in my organization opened up to it, I didn't know how to respond to it. And it is one of those things that you start to get comfortable, like with anything else, any difficult conversation over time. But I think, the whole point of this whole podcast, even today, is sharing that, opening it up, and knowing that actually it's more common than we think, and getting very comfortable with it in the workplace if we're going to see more and more women wanting to work as well as have the opportunity to be a mother. I do have one question around this process of choice and the aging population or delaying pregnancy. How are you finding women being able to manage motherhood at a later stage, or then bearing a child at a later stage in their late 40s and 50s? And what advice do you have for women doing that in terms of their own health choices?
First thing, if they're 40 or above, that before they get pregnant, they should definitely get a very thorough medical. So I just tell them to go to their GP and get an absolute thorough, and the partner, the male as well. We're going to work really hard to help you get pregnant, and then if you do get pregnant, you've got to deal with it. So medically, people often do have issues. They need to be in the optimal health, so that's an excuse to go to the GP and talk about it. The other thing is, older people are actually quite sensible. There's a bit of maturity with getting into your late 30s and 40s. So I find that they've had a lot of life experience under their belt, and consequently, they're not quite as naive as the young 20-year-old. So it's not that difficult a conversation with them about moving it. So they start thinking about how they best want to do it. They plan things in terms of how the child, their workforce stuff, what they're going to do. So I don't actually find that one too difficult. It's not such a shock to them.
Fantastic. And just as we come to the end of this conversation, is there anything that you wanted to share or add that we may not have touched on today?
Look, I think ultimately, fertility hasn't really opened up. There's no question that it's still seen as fairly private. People, struggle with it. Particularly the men. I don't think they talk to each other much about it at all. They really just don't. I haven't seen any huge shift in that. The females, there's a lot more access on information and groups on forums on the internet, which I think is great. And I think that's really helpful to them. They need to talk to someone about it. But in fact, as soon as they do say something, they'll discover that it's more common than they realize, and that's very helpful to talk to someone. And it's really just about opening up and saying, but it's how they do it. It's still fairly private. So sometimes forums are one way of getting at people, that they can still control the information.
Yeah, and of course, reaching out to specialists such as yourself as well.
Look, there's tons of us around, seriously. Look, I do think from a fertility perspective, they should probably jump straight to the experts. You get a lot. We see a lot of people come through GPs, generalists, and stuff. But we're very good at what we do, and we're very quick at what we do. We can get to the bottom of it and then really lay out a roadmap for a way forward, and that's what we do. So my feeling is that probably, just ask the GP for a referral, and you'll get a lot more, feedback from us guys than you will from them. That's what we do.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Dr. Greening, for your time today, and thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode on the Leora Workplace Wellbeing app. Check out the book, Roadmap to Fertility. I've seen it on Amazon. If this topic is of relevance to you, if it's something that you're undergoing, or you're just keen to build your awareness around fertility. Thank you again.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for letting me be on your podcast.